Crown Market did not orbit the dead moon so much as it choked it. The station was a haphazard ring of durasteel and ambition, a coagulated belt of salvage yards, neon-drenched bazaars, and dockyards that catered to every vice known to the three sectors. From the cockpit of his battered hauler, the Iron Moth, Elias Vance watched the station glitter against the void. It looked like a jeweled tourniquet, beautiful and desperate. Elias rubbed his eyes, feeling the grit of a 70-hour shift under his eyelids. The salvage run had been a bust. 3 days traversing the debris field of the Sector 4 conflict zone, and all they had to show for it were a few crates of localized gravity coils and a hull ravaged by micrometeoroids. I am detecting a stress fracture in the port landing strut. The dry, synthesized voice of Kite, his shipboard AI, echoed through the cockpit speakers. And your heart rate suggests you are operating at 30% efficiency. I advise sleep, or a new career. Elias toggled the landing sequence, his hands moving over the worn controls with practiced ease. We have bills to pay. Kite. Morality does not pay the docking fees. Correction. Kite replied. Morality is the primary reason we cannot pay the docking fees. If you had allowed us to transport those illicit narcotics last month, our profit margins would be up 400%. I do not run drugs, Elias muttered, guiding the heavy ship into the designated maglock lane. And I do not run slaves, which is why we are currently flying a rust bucket, Kite concluded. The ship shuddered as the docking clamps engaged. The hiss of equalization pressure filled the cabin, a sound Elias associated with safety and poverty in equal measure. He unbuckled his crash webbing and stood up, his joints popping. He was a tall man, lean and hardened by gravity shifts, with a face that usually sat in a neutral expression of wariness. He grabbed his jacket, a heavy leather thing that had seen better decades, and checked the pistol at his hip. Crown Market was not a place to walk unarmed, especially when you were broke and principled. The air outside the ship smelled of ozone, recycled spices, and unwashed bodies. The docking bay was a chaotic theater of commerce. Drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets, scanning cargo crates and ignoring the obvious contraband whenever a bribe was electronically transferred. Elias walked through the throng, ignoring the catcalls from street vendors selling roasted lizard skewers and synthetic memory chips. He was meeting Maro Sen in a place called the Rust Bucket, a dive bar that sat precariously on a structural strut overlooking the lower bazaar. Maro was a fixer. He was charming, too connected, and possessed a smile that could sell ice to a cryo planet. Elias found him in a back booth, nursing a drink that glowed a toxic green. Maro waved him over, his grin bright enough to cut through the smoke. Elias, Maro said, sliding a glass across the table. You look like you wrestled a singularity and lost. I feel like it, Elias said, ignoring the drink. You said you had a job, a payout beyond credits. Maro leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. I do, and it is the easiest money you will ever make. I need you to move a crate, just one, small, black, secured with biometric locks. From where to where? Elias asked. From a private hangar in the upper tier to the consortium logistics hub. 3 miles of transit, no jumps, no debris fields. Elias narrowed his eyes. If it is that simple, why pay me a premium? Why not use a drone? Because drones have logs, Maro said, tapping the side of his nose. And this crate does not exist on any manifest. It is a gift for the ruling consortium. You deliver it. You get paid enough to overhaul your engine, and I owe you a favor. A real one. Elias considered it. He was behind on fuel costs, and Kite was threatening to shut down non-essential systems, which usually included the coffee maker. Fine. Where is the pickup? Marrow beamed. VIP gallery. Hangar 7. I will send the credentials to your slate. Elias stood up, the unease already prickling at the base of his neck. If this goes sideways, Morrow, I am coming back for you. Morrow laughed, a light, airy sound. You worry too much, pilot. It is just a box. But as Elias made his way toward the upper tiers, the station began to feel different. The usual chaotic flow of the crowd was disrupted. He saw security drones rerouted, forming a perimeter around the VIP lifts. He saw a diplomatic shuttle docked at a private pier, its hull sleek and silver. But the registry transponder was broadcasting a generic civilian ID. That was illegal, and on a station like Crown Market, illegal things usually happened with loud bribes. This was quiet. Kite, scan the local net, Elias whispered into his comm bead. What is happening in Hangar 7? Encryption levels are unusually high, Kite replied in his ear. I am detecting movement of high-level personnel. A senator's aide just cleared a checkpoint. And Elias? Yeah? I am detecting a biological signature matching the crate dimensions Morrow provided. It is not cargo. It is breathing. Elias stopped in the middle of the corridor. The neon sign above him flickered, casting him in intermittent shadow. A living cargo. He should turn around. He should walk back to his ship, detach, and burn hard for the outer rim. But the curiosity, that fatal flaw of his, combined with the desperate need for credits, pushed him forward. He checked his pistol again and stepped into the lift. The VIP gallery was a different world. The floor was polished obsidian, mirroring the high, vaulted ceilings. Silk curtains hung from invisible rods, dampening the sound of the station outside. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone-scrubbed purity. A droid ushered him toward a set of double doors. Inside, the lounge was set up like a shrine. Low lighting, plush seating, and a raised stage in the center. There were 4 other men in the room. 2 were guards, heavily armored but trying to look discreet. One was a broker Elias recognized by reputation, a man named Kalen, known for selling things that had no business being sold. Ah, the courier, Kalen said, his voice smooth as oil. You are early, but perhaps that is for the best. You can witness the quality of the merchandise before you transport it. Elias stayed near the door, his hand hovering near his belt. I am just here for the box. Kalen smiled, a cruel, thin expression. We do not put masterpieces in boxes until they are sold. He gestured to the stage. The lights dimmed, focusing on a single point. A section of the floor retracted, and a platform rose. Elias looked, and the breath slammed out of his lungs. It was a woman, or at least, she had the shape of one. She was tall, her skin a pale moonlight shade of violet that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Faint, bioluminescent patterns traced the line of her spine and curled around her arms, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat. She was impossibly beautiful, with a fierce, angular grace that made the opulent room look cheap by comparison. She was bound in a restraint halo, a shimmering ring of energy that hovered around her wrists and neck. It looked ceremonial, elegant even, but Elias knew tech when he saw it. That was a neural damper, one wrong move, and it would flood her nervous system with agonizing pain. He was offered an alien woman as a slave, Kalen announced, his voice echoing in the silence. Elias froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But it was not the words that paralyzed him. It was her face. As the woman looked up, her eyes locked onto his. They were large, dark, and filled with a terrified intelligence. And they were identical to the eyes in a photograph Elias had found 20 years ago, hidden in a lockbox beneath his mother's floorboards. A photograph of his mother, young and smiling, holding an alien infant with those same violet tones, those same star-filled eyes. The timestamp on the photo had been decades old. His mother had disappeared shortly after he found that picture. The government file said she was a clerk who died in a shuttle accident. The file was sealed. Elias fought to keep his face impassive, but his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Your heart rate just spiked to 180 beats per minute," Kite whispered, his voice devoid of its usual sarcasm. "You look like a man staring at a ghost." The woman, Lyra, though Elias did not know her name yet, stared at him. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed immediately by a wave of confusion and fear. She had been told that a key existed, a human key, and the man standing in the doorway, with his worn jacket and tired face, matched the genetic projection she had memorized in the dark. Elias took a step forward, his boots loud on the polished floor. "This is not a crate," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Kalen chuckled. "No. She is a gift, a rare specimen from the outer expanses. The transport fee remains the same. Pilot, do not develop a conscience now. It is unbecoming." Elias looked at the guards. They had shifted, their hands resting on their assault rifles. He looked at Lyra. She was trembling, fighting the restraint halo, her chin held high in defiance. He could refuse. If he refused, they would kill him. Or they would find another pilot, someone who would not care, someone who would treat her like the cargo she was labeled as. The broker stepped closer to Lyra, reaching out to touch her face. "If you are hesitant, I can brand her contract to someone else. There is a mining guild boss who has been asking for something exotic for his private collection." A cold rage, sharp and crystalline, formed in Elias's chest. He forced his muscles to relax. He forced his face into a mask of bored indifference. "No need," Elias said. He walked toward the stage, ignoring the guards. "I will take the contract." Kalen raised an eyebrow. "The courier wishes to become the owner. You do not have the funds, pilot. I am not buying her for me." Elias lied smoothly. "I am buying her to ensure the delivery is completed without your interference. I will take the contract as collateral until the consortium pays out." Kalen paused. It was an unorthodox request, but greed was a powerful blinder. He tapped a command into his data pad. "Standard collateral rates apply. You sign. She is your responsibility until transfer." Elias tapped his own wrist comp, linking to the station's trade grid. He initiated the transfer of his entire savings, every credit he had scraped together for the engine overhaul. It was barely enough to cover the deposit. "Done," Elias said. "Send the contract." The digital file hit his slate. Elias opened it, his eyes scanning the dense legal code. He found what he was looking for. Paragraph 4, subsection 9. A vestigial piece of interstellar law that Crown Market usually ignored, but technically still recognized to maintain its trade license. "I accept the contract," Elias said loud enough for the room to hear. "And as the legal holder of this deed, I invoke the manumission clause of the Interstellar Transit Authority." Kalen stopped. "Excuse me?" "I am voiding the contract," Elias said, looking up, his eyes hard. "She is free, immediately." Silence stretched in the room, tight as a bowstring. Then, Kalen threw his head back and laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "You think laws apply here?" Kalen asked, wiping a tear from his eye. "You think you can walk into my lounge, quote a dead statute, and walk out with my property?" The guards raised their rifles. The click of safety catches disengaging was the loudest sound in the universe. "The law on Crown Market is what we say it is," Kalen hissed. "Kill him. Keep the girl. Now. Kite." Elias yelled. The lights in the lounge did not just go out, they exploded. Kite overloaded the power couplings, sending a blinding, strobing surge through the filaments. Sparks showered down like fireworks. The emergency alarm screamed a high-pitched wail that shattered concentration. Elias moved. He did not run away. He ran toward the stage. The guards fired blindly, plasma bolts searing the air above his head. Elias slid across the polished floor, coming to a stop at Lyra's feet. She was flinching away from the noise, the halo flaring red as it tried to interpret the chaos. Elias grabbed her shoulders, and she was warm, solid. "You are not property," he said, his voice low and steady beneath the screaming alarms. "You are leaving with me." Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide with mistrust. She had been trained to expect cruelty disguised as help. She pulled back, baring her teeth. Elias looked at the restraint halo. It was a complex weave of hard light and kinetic locks. He should not have known how to open it. He was a salvage pilot, not a slicer. But as his fingers touched the control node at her neck, a strange sensation washed over him, a ghost of a memory that wasn't his. His fingers moved on their own, tapping out a 7-digit sequence in a rhythm he had never learned. Click. Hiss. The halo deactivated and fell to the floor with a heavy clang. Lyra gasped, rubbing her wrists. She looked at Elias, shock replacing the fear. "How did you do that?" "I do not know," Elias admitted, pulling her up. "Run!" They sprinted toward the service entrance as the emergency doors began to cycle shut. A guard loomed out of the strobe light darkness, rifle raised. Before Elias could lift his pistol, Lyra moved. She did not move like a captive. She moved like water. She dropped low, sweeping the guard's legs, and as he fell, she drove her palm into his solar plexus with a sickening crunch. She grabbed the guard's sidearm and tossed it to Elias. "Go!" They dove into the maintenance shaft just as the blast doors slammed shut, sealing the lounge behind them. The shaft was a vertical tunnel of steam pipes and dripping coolant lines. Gravity here was unstable, fluctuating between standard and 0G. "We need a route." "Kite!" Elias shouted into the comms. "Drones are deploying from the upper vents." Kite responded, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "I am piloting the ship to the waste disposal dock on level 40. It is the only exit not currently swarming with kill teams. You have 3 minutes before they lock down the sector." "Lead the way," Elias said. They ran. It was a nightmare of verticality. They leaped across gaps where the walkway had rusted away, the dead moon looming vast and silent through cracks in the hull. Drones buzzed down the shaft, red eyes scanning. Action. Elias fired, the recoil of the heavy pistol jarring his arm. A drone exploded in a shower of sparks. Lyra was right beside him. She vaulted over a steam vent, her movements precise, efficient. She anticipated the gravity shifts before they happened, adjusting her momentum in midair. "Who taught you to move like that?" Elias yelled over the roar of a venting pipe. "Survival," she shouted back. They reached the waste disposal dock. The airlock was cycling. Through the thick glass, Elias saw the iron moth. No, it was just a ship, his sanctuary, drifting into position, its loading ramp extending like a tongue. "We are clear," Elias shouted. Suddenly, Lyra stumbled. She cried out, clutching her chest. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin flared violently, then dimmed, glitching like a dying star map. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. "Lyra!" Elias skidded to a stop and grabbed her. "It is the implant," she gasped, her voice tight with pain. "It knows." "I am out of bounds." Elias scooped her up. She was lighter than she looked, but the heat radiating from her skin was intense. He ran up the ramp, his boots clanging on the metal. "Kite, punch it." The ramp hissed shut. The engines roared, and the ship lurched away from the station, tearing through the magnetic containment field. "Warning," Kite announced. "Slag cannons firing. Shields at 40%. "Get us into the drift," Elias ordered, strapping Lyra into the co-pilot seat. He jumped into the pilot's chair, his hands flying over the controls. The ship shuddered as a plasma bolt clipped the aft stabilizer. Elias grit his teeth and threw the ship into a corkscrew maneuver, diving into the cloud of debris that surrounded the moon. "We have a tag," Kite said. "A sleek frigate just launched from the private pier. It has a lock on us." "Jam it," Elias said. "I am trying," Kite replied. "But the signal is not digital. It is not thermal. It is impossible. I cannot isolate the source. It is like the hull itself is broadcasting." Elias looked at the sensor screen. The red dot of the pursuer was closing in fast. They were being hunted by something they couldn't blind. He looked over at Lyra. She was slumped in the seat, her skin pale, the lights beneath her flesh pulsing a weak, erratic rhythm. She turned her head, her dark eyes finding his. She whispered a single sentence, her human accent broken and thick with pain, but the warning was clear enough to freeze the blood in his veins. "If you took me," she rasped, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength, "they will burn worlds to get me back." The silence of deep space was usually a comfort to Elias Vance, but tonight it felt heavy, pressing against the hull of the Iron Moth like a physical weight. The ship was drifting in the shadow of a nondescript gas giant, hiding in the magnetosphere to mask their thermal signature. Elias lay on his back beneath the secondary console of the cockpit, grease smearing his cheek as he welded a bypass circuit into the main navigational array. Sparks showered down, bouncing harmlessly off his heavy leather jacket. "We are now fugitives with a moral superiority complex," Kite said, its synthesized voice echoing from the overhead speakers. "I have calculated our current net worth. It is negative. We are effectively paying the universe for the privilege of existing." Elias ignored the sarcasm, focusing on the delicate fusion of wire and chip. "We are alive, Kite. Focus on that metric. Being alive is a prerequisite for suffering," Kite countered. "I preferred it when we were just broke. Now we are broke and hunted by a consortium that disassembles people for sport." Elias slid out from under the console, wiping his hands on a rag. "Is the hull breach in the cargo hold sealed?" "Temporarily," Kite said. "But if we hit atmospheric turbulence, the structural integrity will be comparable to a wet paper bag." Elias sighed, tossing the rag onto the pilot's seat. He looked at the closed door of the medbay. He had been avoiding it for the last 3 hours, occupying himself with repairs that could have waited, simply because he did not know what to say to the woman inside. He walked to the door, took a breath, and palmed the sensor. The door hissed open. Lyra was not in the recovery bed. Elias froze, his hand instinctively dropping to the pistol at his hip. The room was dark, lit only by the low-level diagnostic LEDs. He stepped inside, scanning the corners, movement to his left. Before he could turn, a cold, hard object pressed against his carotid artery. He realized instantly it was a surgical vibro cutter, inactive but sharp enough to draw blood. "Do not move," a voice hissed in his ear. It was low, melodic, and edged with a tremor of pain. Elias held up his hands. "Slowly. I am not going to hurt you." Lyra shifted, keeping him pinned. She was weak. He could feel her trembling against his back, her weight sagging, but the intent was lethal. She had cleared the room like a soldier, checking blind spots, securing a weapon, and ambushing the target. This was not the behavior of a helpless slave. "Why did you not claim me?" she demanded. Her human standard language was accented, the vowels stretching too long. Elias spoke calmly. I told you back at the station. I bought the contract to void it. No one does that, she snapped. You spent credits, a fortune. You bought a weapon. You bought a key. Why are you not using me? Because I am not a slaver, Elias said. She pressed the blade harder against his neck. Everyone is something. What are you? I am a pilot who is very tired, Elias said. And you are going to pass out in about 10 seconds because your adrenaline is crashing. Put the cutter down. Lyra. She hesitated. The tension in her arm wavered. Then, with a soft exhale of defeat, she pulled the blade away and stumbled back. Elias turned just in time to catch her before she hit the deck plates. He guided her back to the biobed. She flinched at his touch, her muscles coiling tight, but she lacked the strength to fight him. He sat her on the edge of the mattress. Her skin was burning, the bioluminescent patterns on her arms pulsing in an angry, erratic rhythm. Elias took the vibro cutter from her limp hand and set it on the tray. He pulled a stool over and sat down, making sure he was lower than her eye level. He looked at her, really looked at her, up close. The resemblance to the photo in his mother's lockbox was haunting. But where the infant in the picture had been innocent, Lyra was a map of scars, both visible and invisible. Saving you does not make you mine, Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. I need you to understand that. I do not own you. I do not want to own you. You are on this ship because it was the only way to get you out of that room. Lyra stared at him, searching his face for the lie. She was used to transactions, to leverage, to pain. Kindness without a price tag was an alien concept. You are a fool then, she whispered. Maybe, Elias admitted. But you are safe here. As long as you are on this ship, you have a choice, in everything. She let out a bitter, dry laugh and touched the back of her neck. I have no choice. Not while this is inside me. She turned her head, sweeping her hair aside to reveal the base of her skull. The skin there was raised and angry, surrounding a metallic node that seemed to shimmer, phasing in and out of visual focus. The compliance lattice, she said. It is not just a restraint. It is a governor. It monitors my location, my vitals, and my obedience. If I disobey a direct command from the contract holder, it stimulates the pain centers of my brain until I comply. If I try to remove it, it releases a neurotoxin if I get too far from the contract holder. It kills you, Elias finished, a cold knot forming in his stomach. It turns off my heart, she corrected, like a switch. Elias stood up and grabbed a medical scanner. Let me see. He ran the scanner over her neck, the device whirred, then gave a harsh buzz of error. Kite, run a deep spectrum analysis, Elias ordered. I am attempting to, Kite replied, but the device is refusing to return a consistent mass reading. It appears to be constructed of phase-locked matter. It is shifting between physical states roughly 50 times a second. Phase-locked, Elias muttered. That is military-grade tech. That is not something a standard slaver uses. Lyra buttoned her collar, wincing. It is ancient technology. My people. We do not make these anymore. They were found, repurposed. Elias grabbed a pair of surgical forceps. Hold still. I just want to test the surface density. He brought the metal tips toward the node, just as he made contact. The forceps passed straight through the device as if it were made of smoke, clattering against Lyra's skin on the other side. She gasped, a jolt of shock going through her. Elias pulled back, staring at the tool. It ghosted right through. I can surgically remove the entire torso, Kite suggested helpfully. That would technically remove the device. Elias glared at the ceiling speaker. Not the time. Kite. Lyra looked between them, her brow furrowed. That would be fatal. Why would the machine suggest that? It is a joke, Elias said, rubbing his temples. A bad one. Kite thinks humor improves morale. I do not understand, Lyra said, her voice flat. Removal of the torso is not efficient. It is sarcasm, Elias explained, though he didn't have the energy to define the concept. Look, we cannot cut it out, not with standard tools. If we try to force it, the lattice will trigger the toxin. We need a specialist. I know a doctor, Elias continued, thinking aloud. She operates out of a hollowed-out asteroid in the smuggler's belt. Dr. Sable Yoon. She owes me a favor, and she hates the consortium almost as much as I do. Lyra watched him, her suspicion warring with desperation. Why would she help? Because I will ask her to, Elias said, and because she is the best xenobiologist in the sector. He stood up, offering her a ration bar from his pocket. Eat. We are setting a course for the asteroid. Lyra took the bar, her fingers brushing his. Her skin was fever-hot. Thank you, she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. The asteroid was known as the Sunder, a jagged rock tumbling through a dense field of ice crystals. It was a haven for everyone the law had forgotten. Pirates, debtors, and political exiles. Elias navigated the Iron Moth into a concealed fissure, guiding the ship through a narrow tunnel that opened into a pressurized hangar carved from the rock itself. They were met at the airlock by Dr. Sable Yoon. She was a short, severe woman with cybernetic ocular implants that whirred softly as she looked them over. She wore a stained lab coat over combat fatigues, and she held a heavy wrench like a scepter. Elias, she said, her voice like grinding gravel. You look terrible. Good to see you too. Sable, Elias said. She looked past him to Lyra, who was standing defensively by the ramp, wrapped in one of Elias's spare shirts. Sable's mechanical eyes narrowed. Zooming in. You brought heat to my doorstep. Elias, Sable said quietly. That is a Crown Market tag on her restraint. She needs help, Elias said. The implant is phase-locked. Sable swore softly in a language Elias didn't know. Bring her inside, quickly. The clinic was a chaotic mess of scavenged medical equipment and half-disassembled droids, but the surgical table was pristine. Sable ordered Lyra to lie down. She didn't ask. She commanded, her bedside manner non-existent. Lyra obeyed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Elias stood by her head, letting her see him. He wanted her to know he wasn't leaving. Sable pulled a massive, suspended scanner over Lyra's body. This is going to feel cold, she warned. The machine hummed. Screens on the wall lit up with cascading data. Sable watched the readout, her frown deepening. This is not just a restraint, Sable said, her voice dropping. What is it? Elias asked. Sable typed a command, isolating a section of the data stream. It is a storage drive, a memory vault. The lattice is woven into her neural cortex, but it is also storing petabytes of encrypted data. She turned to Lyra. You are not a pleasure slave. You are a courier. Lyra closed her eyes. I am a witness, she whispered. Elias stepped closer. What are you talking about? Lyra opened her eyes. They were wet with tears she refused to shed. I was not captured by accident. I am an operative for the royal intelligence of my homeworld. We knew diplomats were vanishing near the border. We knew someone was selling them. I let myself be taken to find the source. And? Elias asked. And I found it, Lyra said. I recorded everything. The faces of the buyers, the routes, the money trails. It is all in the vault. Sable tapped the screen. That explains the encryption. This level of security, it is state level. But here is the problem. The vault is biometrically locked. It requires a key to open safely without frying her brain. Lyra looked at Elias. The key is genetic. It is tied to a specific human lineage, a bloodline that was present when the initial treaty between our species was signed 50 years ago. Elias felt the room tilt. The photograph. His mother holding the alien infant. The sealed government file. My mother, Elias said, his voice hollow. Lyra nodded. The genetic marker I was shown, it is yours. You are the only one who can unlock the vault. That is why I froze when I saw you. You are the key. Elias reeled back, his back hitting a metal cabinet. He felt a surge of nausea. His entire life, he had thought his mother was a simple clerk, a victim of a random accident. But she had been involved in this. She had been part of a conspiracy that spanned 2 civilizations. And now, 20 years later, he was being used to clean up the mess. I did not ask for this, Elias growled, slamming his hand against the metal shelf. Tools rattled. I am a salvage pilot. I am not a spy. I am not a hero. You are what you are, Sable said sharply. And right now, you are the only thing keeping this woman alive. The implant is degrading. The phase state is unstable. If we do not unlock it and remove it soon, the feedback loop will kill her. How long? Elias asked. Days, Sable said. Maybe less. Elias looked at Lyra. She was watching him, not with expectation, but with a quiet resignation. She expected him to leave. She expected him to run. He took a deep breath, forcing the anger down into a cold, hard knot in his gut. Can you stabilize her? Sable nodded. I can give her a suppressant to manage the pain, but I cannot remove it. Not here. Do it, Elias said. Later, while Sable worked in the back room synthesizing the suppressant. Elias sat with Lyra in a small recovery alcove. The asteroid's ventilation system hummed, a low, rhythmic thrumming that filled the silence. Lyra was sitting on the edge of the cot, her hands gripping the edge of the mattress until her knuckles were white. The withdrawal from the compliance programming was hitting her hard. Her body was shaking, fine tremors that started in her core and radiated out. Elias sat on the floor a few feet away. He didn't crowd her. He didn't touch her. He just sat there, cleaning his pistol. A mundane, repetitive action meant to ground the room in reality. Lyra watched his hands. They were scarred, calloused hands, but they moved with a steady, gentle precision. She had seen men's hands do terrible things. She had never seen them create safety. It hurts, she whispered. I know, Elias said, not looking up. Just breathe. It is your nervous system trying to rewire itself. It means you are winning. She slid off the cot, her legs failing her. She hit the floor with a thud. Elias started to move, then stopped himself. He waited. Lyra crawled toward him. It was not an act of submission, it was a seek for heat. She was freezing, her body in shock. She stopped in front of him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Touch me, she said. Elias set the pistol down. Lyra, please, she begged, her eyes wide and dark. Not a command. I need to feel something real, something that does not hurt. Elias looked at her. He saw the terrifying vulnerability in her, but also the fierce demand for agency. She was asking. For the first time in God knows how long she was asking. What do you want? Elias asked softly. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his chest. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. A kiss. She breathed. Elias went still. Are you sure? She nodded against his jacket. Yes. He reached out, his hands hovering for a second before he cupped her face. Her skin was burning hot against his palms. He tilted her head up. He didn't rush. He let her close the distance. When her lips met his, it wasn't a movie kiss. It was desperate, clumsy, and tasted of salt and metallic fear. It was a collision of two people trying to prove they were still alive. Lyra pushed into him, her hands clutching his jacket. For a moment, the kiss deepened, becoming urgent, a flare of heat in the cold room. But then her body tensed, a spasm of pain from the implant or a flash of memory. Elias didn't know. He pulled back immediately. He stopped, his hands staying on her face but moving to her jaw, gentle and steady. He pulled away just an inch, his eyes searching hers. "Okay?" he asked. Lyra breathed, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, surprised that he had stopped, surprised that her hesitation had been met with respect, not force. She realized then that desire could be a choice, that it could be something she gave, not something that was taken. She reached out, grabbing his lapels, and pulled him back. "Yes," she whispered. She kissed him again. This time, it was slower. It was an exploration. It was a question and an answer. It was trust, fragile and new, being built in the silence between heartbeats. The explosion rocked the clinic, knocking them both sideways. Dust rained down from the rock ceiling. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the red strobing of emergency klaxons. Elias was on his feet in a second, the pistol in his hand. Lyra was right behind him, her weakness forgotten, her body snapping into combat mode. Sable ran into the room, racking the slide on a kinetic shotgun. "They found us." "Who?" Elias shouted. "The outer airlock just breached," Sable yelled. "Maro Sen sent a message. He says hello. And he says the senator wants his property back." "Maro," Elias spat. "Of course. A kill team," Sable said. 6 heat signatures. Heavy armor. They are in the main corridor. "We need a way out," Elias said. "The coolant tunnels," Sable said, pointing to a grate in the floor. "It leads to the ventilation exhaust near the hangar. It is tight, and it is hot." "Go," Elias ordered. They kicked the grate open. Sable went first, then Lyra. Elias dropped in last, firing 2 shots down the hallway at the shadows moving through the smoke. The tunnel was a nightmare of confined space and searing heat. They crawled over pipes that burned to the touch. Above them, they could hear the heavy thud of magnetic boots. They reached the exhaust port. It opened out onto a catwalk high above the hangar floor. The Iron Moth was there, but between them and the ship stood 2 armored figures. Slaver enforcement. They wore full tactical gear, faceless helmets reflecting the hangar lights. Elias raised his pistol, but Lyra was faster. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't need one. She used the environment. She grabbed a hanging coolant hose, snapped the valve with a precise kick, and sprayed high-pressure, freezing gas into the face of the first guard. He screamed as his visor frosted over, blinding him. Lyra used his confusion as a fulcrum, vaulting off the railing and slamming both feet into his chest. He went over the edge of the catwalk, falling into the dark chasm below. The second guard turned, raising a rifle. Elias fired, but the shot pinged off the heavy armor. Lyra didn't retreat. She ducked under the rifle swing, moving inside the guard's reach. She struck him, throat, knee, groin, 3 strikes in under a second. As he doubled over, she grabbed his own knife from his belt and drove it into the unarmored joint of his neck armor. He dropped. Elias stared at her. She stood over the body, breathing hard, her hands steady. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "I told you," she said. "I am not a slave. Remind me never to make you angry," Elias said, holstering his gun. They sprinted for the ship. Sable stopped at the ramp. "This is as far as I go," she said. I have to scrub the clinic before they trace the data. Sable, Elias started. Go, she shouted. Get her out of here. And Elias, make them pay. Elias nodded once, then grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her up the ramp. The iron moth blasted out of the asteroid, engines screaming as Elias pushed the reactor to the red line. Kite. Status. Elias yelled as he strapped in. We are clear of the asteroid, Kite reported. But the tracker signal is still active. How? Elias slammed his hand on the console. I swept the ship. There is no device. It is not a device, Kite said. I have finally isolated the frequency. It is biological. There is a colony of resonant nanospores seeded into the outer hull. They are feeding off our engine radiation and broadcasting our position. A living tracker, Elias said. We can't scrape that off without dry docking. We cannot dry dock, Lyra said from the co-pilot seat. They will find us before the clamps lock. Then we need to kill the signal, Elias said. Kite, can we jam it? Negative, Kite said. The spores operate on quantum entanglement. Distance does not degrade the signal. No, they know exactly where we are. Lyra looked at the star map. Her eyes narrowed. There is a place, she said. Elias looked at her. What place? The choir, she said. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with space. The choir was a legend among spacers, a region of space where physics broke down, an anomaly of gravitational shearing and quantum noise that drove nav computers insane and turned ships into scrap metal. It was a graveyard. That is suicide, Elias said. No ship can navigate the choir. The sensors go blind. Human sensors go blind, Lyra corrected. My people. We have a way. We hear the song. I can guide us. Elias looked at the tactical display. 3 red dots were closing in. Heavy cruisers. They would be in weapons range in 5 minutes. He looked at Lyra. She was terrified. Yes, but she was also certain. If we go in there, Elias said, we might not come out. If we stay here, Lyra said, we are dead, and the truth dies with us. Elias looked at her hands. They were clenched in her lap, but when she saw him looking, she opened them. A choice. Trust me, she said. Elias let out a long breath. He grabbed the throttle. Kite, plot a course for the choir. You are both insane, Kite said. I am beginning to regret not being a toaster. The iron moth banked hard, turning away from the open shipping lanes and accelerating toward the shimmering, distorted veil of the anomaly. Behind them, the cruisers opened fire, plasma bolts streaking through the void, but it was too late. Elias punched the drive, and they plunged into the noise. The transition into the choir was not like entering a nebula or an asteroid field. It was like crashing through the surface of a frozen ocean and drowning in light. The iron moth shuddered violently, the hull groaning under stresses that had no name in standard physics. Outside the cockpit canopy, the stars had vanished. In their place were shifting curtains of iridescence, sheets of violet, gold, and bleeding crimson that rippled like silk in a gale. But it was the sound that terrified Elias. It was not a sound carried by air, for there was none. It was a resonant vibration that bypassed the ears and hummed directly into the marrow of his bones. A low, thrumming cello note that escalated into a scream and backed down to a whisper, over and over again. Elias gripped the flight stick, his knuckles white. The navigational console was a Christmas tree of error messages. Kite, I need a vector, Elias shouted over the groaning metal. I am attempting to compensate, Kite replied, its voice modulated to cut through the phantom noise. But the gravitational constant in this region is variable. It changes every 4 seconds. Mathematics does not work here. Elias. Logic is being offended on a fundamental level. It is not math, Lyra called out. She was strapped into the co-pilot seat. Her eyes squeezed shut, her hands pressed over her ears. "It is a melody." Elias glanced at her. Her skin was glowing, the bioluminescent patterns pulsing in perfect sync with the external waves of light. "What?" Elias asked. "Listen to the rise and fall," Lyra said. Her voice strained. "The gravity shifts with the pitch. High frequency is a push. Low frequency is a pull. You have to fly the ship like you are singing the harmony." Elias looked at the swirling chaos outside. A wall of distorted light was rushing toward them, a gravitational shear that would tear the ship in half. "Pitch is rising," Lyra yelled. "Push against it." Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate. He trusted her. He slammed the thrusters forward, diving the ship into the oncoming wave. The inertial dampeners whined, and for a second, weight crushed them into their seats. Then, they broke through, gliding into a pocket of calm. "Kite, did you catch that?" Elias gasped. "I have correlated the acoustic variance with the gravitational anomalies," Kite said, sounding grudgingly impressed. "The alien is correct. We are navigating via opera, and this is highly undignified." "Just give me the numbers." "Kite," Elias said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "Lyra, keep listening." They flew like that for what felt like hours. Though time in the choir was as fluid as the light, it was a dance of desperate improvisation. Kite provided the raw data, translating the chaos into vectors of probability. But it was Lyra who interpreted the intent of the storm. She called out the shifts before they happened, sensing the emotional tenor of the energy around them. "Left! Sharp left!" she would cry out, her voice cracking. "It is angry here." Elias threw the ship into a roll, narrowly missing a pocket of collapsed space that looked like a jagged hole in the universe. For the first time, they were a single unit. Elias provided the muscle and the reflex, the human stubbornness to refuse death. Lyra provided the vision, the alien empathy that saw connection where others saw chaos. It was terrifying, and it was intimate. In the cockpit of that screaming ship, they were sewing their survival together with every turn. Suddenly, the turbulence vanished. The iron moth drifted into a clearing in the storm, a bubble of silence surrounded by the raging walls of light. In the center of this eye, something was floating. It was immense, a structure of dark, matte stone, or metal that mimicked stone, suspended in the void. But the geometry was wrong. It looked like a series of cubes and pyramids that had been folded through a fourth dimension, their angles intersecting in ways that made Elias's eyes ache if he stared too long. It was a ruin, ancient and dead, drifting in the heart of the noise. "That is it," Lyra whispered, unbuckling her crash webbing. "The repository." As she stood up, a jolt of electricity arced from her neck. She cried out, clutching the compliance lattice. "Lyra!" Elias was out of his seat instantly, catching her as she swayed. The air between them flickered. The implant was reacting to the proximity of the ruin, or perhaps the intensity of the transit. A beam of hard light shot out from the node at the base of her skull, projecting a holographic image into the center of the cockpit. It was a recording, grainy and distorted, but the faces were clear. Two figures stood in a sterile office. One was a human man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Senator Corin Halden. Elias recognized him from the news feeds. The man was a champion of border security and trade regulation. The other figure was not human. It was a tall, regal being of Lyra's species, wearing heavy ceremonial robes and a mask of gold glass. The audio crackled. "The agreement is absolute," the senator said, his voice smooth. "We take the surplus population from the border skirmishes. You get the weapons to secure your throne. The paperwork will call them refugees." "And the silence?" the alien figure asked, the voice distorted. "Guaranteed," Halden replied. They vanish. The market is hungry. High Minister. The two figures shook hands. As they did, the alien raised a hand to sign a digital pad. The signet ring on its finger flared, a complex, three-part crest of a predator bird. The hologram frizzled and died. Lyra stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow hitches. "That crest," Elias said, his voice low. "That is the royal seal." Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes." Elias ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small deck. "This is not just human corruption. It is not just smugglers and bad apples. Your government is selling your own people to mine, and yours is buying them to fund a black budget," Lyra said, her voice bitter. "We are both rot. We are not them," Elias said fiercely, stopping in front of her. "We are just the ones who know, and that makes us dangerous." Lyra looked at the dark ruin floating outside. "Then we need to survive long enough to use it. The ruin contains a phase anchor. It is the only thing that can stabilize this lattice before it kills me." "We are going in," Elias said. They docked the Iron Moth at a crumbling spire that jutted out from the main mass of the ruin. The airlock cycle was loud in the sudden silence. They floated into the structure. The artificial gravity inside was faint and directional, changing orientation from room to room. They had to move carefully, using magnetic boots and tether lines. The interior was vast and unnervingly clean. There was no dust. The walls were lined with geometric carvings that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. "I am detecting no atmosphere," Kite said through their suit comms. "And I must say the architecture is pretentious. Why use a door when you can use a rotating aperture that requires a degree in theoretical physics to understand? It is showing off. Focus." "Kite," Elias said. He was floating ahead, his rifle raised, scanning the shadows. They reached a massive central chamber where the floor twisted 90 degrees halfway across, becoming the wall. In the center stood a console made of the same dark stone. "This is the gate," Lyra said, landing softly on the wall floor. "We need to pass this to reach the medical ward." She approached the console. It had no buttons, only two depressions shaped like hands, one large, one small, with intricate sensor grooves. "It requires two inputs," Lyra said, studying the glyphs glowing faintly above it. "Logic and intent. It is a test." Elias drifted down beside her. "What do we do?" "Place your hand here." She indicated the left depression. "I will take the right. You must visualize the destination, the concept of entry, of opening. I must visualize the reason." Elias placed his gloved hand on the stone. It felt warm, despite the vacuum. He closed his eyes. He thought of a door opening. He thought of tumblers clicking into place, of hydraulic seals disengaging. He focused on the mechanics of passage beside him. Lyra closed her eyes. She did not think of mechanics. She thought of safety. She thought of the need to heal, the desperation to survive. She projected the feeling of sanctuary. The stone beneath their hands pulsed. A chime rang out, clear and pure, vibrating through their suits. The wall in front of them groaned and folded inward, the stone retreating like origami paper to reveal a corridor bathed in warm, golden light. "See?" Lyra said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "We fit." They moved deeper into the ruin. The atmosphere scrubbers in this section were still active, and Kite confirmed the air was breathable. They cracked their helmets, inhaling air that smelled of ozone and ancient spice. They found a small antechamber off the main hall. It was a safe room, lit by glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling. In the center was a circular dais, the phase anchor. "It looks like a bed," Elias noted dryly. "It is a stasis field," Lyra corrected. She sat on the edge of the dais, the adrenaline of the flight and the entry finally fading, leaving her exhausted. She began to unbuckle the heavy flight suit, her movements slow. Elias turned his back to give her privacy, watching the corridor. "You know," Lyra said, her voice soft in the quiet room, "when I saw that hologram, the High Minister, I knew him. He was my tutor." Elias turned back. She had stripped down to her undershirt and trousers, sitting cross-legged on the dais. She looked small against the scale of the alien machinery. "He taught me that service is the highest calling." She continued, "I was raised in the palace, not as a daughter but as an asset. My education, my combat training, my diplomatic protocols, it was all to make me valuable. I was never asked what I wanted. I was only told what I was worth." Elias walked over and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "I know the feeling." "Do you?" Lyra asked. Elias looked at the floor. "My father left when I was 5. My mother. She was everything. But she was always afraid. She told me never to get attached to anything you could not walk away from in 30 seconds. She said people were just leverage that the universe used to hurt you." He looked up at Lyra. "So I built my life that way. No roots, no permanent crew, just me and a sarcastic robot. I thought if I had nothing to lose, I was free." "And are you?" Lyra asked. "No," Elias said quietly. "I am just lonely, and I am tired of running." The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't heavy. It was charged. The golden light of the room seemed to soften the sharp angles of their faces. Lyra shifted on the dais. The pain in her neck flared, a sharp reminder of the clock ticking down. But she ignored it. She looked at Elias, this human who had bought her to free her, who had flown into a gravity storm on her word alone. "Come here," she said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Elias pushed off the wall and walked to the edge of the dais. He stood there, respecting the line between them. Lyra reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool, her skin soft. She pulled him closer until his knees bumped the edge of the platform. "I do not want to be an asset anymore," she whispered. "And I do not want to be leverage. I want to be just Lyra. And I want you to be Elias." She leaned forward, her eyes searching his. She looked at his lips, then back up to his eyes. The question was there, open and raw. Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The desire hit him like a physical blow, not just the physical want of her, which was undeniable, but the emotional ache of being seen. "Lyra," he said, his voice rough, "if I touch you, it is because you want it. You understand that? You say stop, and I stop, instantly." "I know," she said. She pulled on his hand, guiding it to her waist. She inhaled sharply at the contact, her eyes fluttering shut. Then she opened them, bold and defiant. "I am choosing. Elias, touch me." He stepped onto the dais. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against him. She made a sound, half gasp, half sigh, and buried her hands in his hair. When he kissed her, it wasn't like the desperate kiss in the clinic. It was slow. It was thorough. It was a conversation without words. He kissed the line of her jaw, the pulse point at her throat. She arched into him, her hands roaming over his shoulders, his back, exploring the solidity of him. She pushed him back onto the dais, climbing over him, taking control. It was a reclaiming of her own body, a declaration that she could desire and take without being owned. Elias let her set the pace, his hands grounding her, his touch reverent, in that quiet chamber. Surrounded by the ghosts of a dead civilization, they found a living warmth. It was sensual and heated, a tangle of limbs and breath, but it was anchored in a profound, healing trust. Afterward, they lay side by side, the golden light dimming to a twilight hue. Elias traced the bioluminescent pattern on her arm with one finger. "You have a map on your skin," he murmured. Lyra laughed softly, a real laugh, light and unburdened. "It is not a map, it is poetry. This line says strength in silence." Elias smiled. "I like that." For a moment, the galaxy outside didn't exist. The conspiracy, the implant, the bounty hunters, it all fell away. There was just the warmth of her skin and the steady beat of his heart. Then, the comms unit on Elias's belt beeped. "Elias," Marosen's voice crackled through the speaker. "I know you are in there. We need to talk." The warmth vanished instantly. Elias sat up, grabbing his rifle. Lyra scrambled to her feet, pulling her shirt back on. The vulnerability replaced instantly by the soldier's mask. "How did he find us?" Elias hissed. "The biological tracker," Lyra said, checking her boots. "It must have left a residual trail through the anomaly." Elias keyed the comms. "Go to hell." "Marrow." "Listen to me," Marrow said, his voice echoing slightly, suggesting he was inside the ruin's outer perimeter. "I am not here to fight. I am here to offer you a way out." Elias motioned for Lyra to stay back. He walked to the doorway, peering down the corridor. "What kind of way out?" Elias asked. "I have looked into your file." "Elias," Marrow said, "the sealed one. The charges against your family. The debt your mother left behind. I can wipe it all clean. You can be a free man. No more salvage runs. No more hiding." Elias paused. Freedom. It was the one thing he had chased for 20 years. To walk into a station without looking over his shoulder. To own his life. "All you have to do," Marrow continued, his voice dropping to a persuasive purr, "is walk away. Leave the girl. The senator just wants the asset secured when you get your life back. She goes home to her people. Everyone wins." Lyra looked at Elias. She didn't speak. She didn't beg. She just watched him, waiting to see if the lesson of the last few hours was real. Elias looked at the empty corridor. He imagined his life cleared of debts. He imagined the peace. Then he looked at Lyra. He saw the woman who had guided him through the storm. He saw the defiance in her eyes. Comfort purchased with someone else's chains is still a prison. "Marrow," Elias said, his voice hard as steel. There was a silence on the line. "That is a pity," Marrow sighed. "I really did like you." "Elias," a deep grinding rumble shook the floor. "He triggered the defense grid," Kite shouted in Elias's earpiece. The walls of the corridor began to shift. The geometric carvings spun and the floor split open. "Elias!" Lyra screamed, lunging for him. Elias reached out, his fingers brushing hers, but the stone wall slammed down between them with the speed of a guillotine. "Lyra!" Elias pounded on the stone. It was solid, cold, and immovable. "Elias, do not stay there." Lyra's voice came muffled through the wall. "The room is rotating." Elias felt the gravity shift. The floor was becoming the ceiling. He had to move or be crushed. "Kite, find her!" Elias yelled, sprinting down the hallway as it twisted like a corkscrew. "I am tracking her biosign," Kite said. "She is being funneled toward the core chamber. You are being redirected to the exterior vents. The ruin is separating you." Elias cursed and ran, dodging shifting pillars of stone. Lyra slid down a chute of polished stone, landing in a heap in a circular room at the very heart of the derelict. The air here was stale and cold. She stood up, her weapon raised. The room was empty of enemies, but it was full of ghosts. In the center of the room, a massive holographic archive was active. It sensed her presence, her genetic signature, and the data stream shifted, coalescing into a single towering image. It was a family tree, a royal lineage. Lyra walked toward it, her heart pounding. She saw the faces of the high ministers, the generals, the kings of her world. And at the bottom, she saw her own face. But the label beneath it did not say operative. It did not say witness. It said Crown Princess Lyra Vane, heir apparent. She froze. The image shifted again, playing a recorded message. It was her father's voice. To my daughter, if you are seeing this, the coup is complete. We had to hide you. We encoded your memories to protect you. The war was never about territory. It was about us. We sold the outer colonies to the humans to buy peace for the core worlds. We are the architects of the slavery. Forgive us. Lyra fell to her knees. She wasn't just a spy who had stumbled onto a secret. She was the secret. Her disappearance wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a pretext. Her family had sold their own people, and when she had found out, before her memory was wiped, they had let her be taken to silence her. She was not a victim of the war. She was the cause of it. The sound of slow, sarcastic clapping echoed from the shadows. Lyra spun around, raising her weapon. Maro Sen stepped out from behind a pillar, holding a disruptor pistol. He looked tired, his fancy suit covered in dust, but his smile was still there. Your Highness, Maro said, bowing mockingly. I must say the disguise was excellent. Even you believed it. You knew? Lyra whispered. The senator knew, Maro said, stepping closer. That is why you are worth so much. You are not just a slave. Lyra, you are the match that lights the bonfire. If you disappear, the aliens declare war. If you return with the truth, your government collapses. He raised the pistol. Personally, I prefer the war option. The profit margins on weapons are much higher than on people. Lyra stared at him, the horror of her identity washing over her. She was a royal heir, a princess of a line of traitors. But as she looked at the gun barrel, she remembered Elias's voice. You are not property. She stood up, her eyes glowing with a fierce, terrible light. Then you should have brought a bigger gun, she said. The escape from the ruin was a blur of shifting geometry and screaming thrusters. But the arrival at the Terran Coalition capital was a different kind of violence. It was a violence of light, noise, and suffocating density. The capital world, Solara Prime, was a planet wrapped in a second skin of orbital rings, skyscrapers that pierced the stratosphere, and a web of traffic lanes so thick it looked like an arterial clot of commerce. Elias piloted the Iron Moth into the lower atmospheric layers, keeping to the smog-choked industrial corridors where the sensors were old and the bribe-takers were plentiful. They weren't just running from a bounty hunter anymore. They were carrying a device, the phase anchor, that weighed half a ton, and a woman who was technically a ghost, a weapon, and a princess all at once. We are entering the chaotic zone, Kite announced, its voice dry. I am broadcasting a fake transponder signal. We are now registered as a sewage hauler named the Stench of Progress. No patrol drone will scan us voluntarily. Good work, Elias grunted, wrestling the ship through a sudden downdraft. Lyra sat in the co-pilot seat, staring out at the endless city. She wore a heavy mechanic's jumpsuit Elias had scrounged from a locker, and her hair was tucked under a grease-stained cap to hide her ears. The bioluminescence on her skin was dim, suppressed by a cocktail of drugs Sable had synthesized before they fled. But she still looked like nothing that belonged on this world. It is so loud, Lyra whispered, pressing a hand to the glass. Even the light has a noise. That is the sound of 10 billion people trying to sell each other something, Elias said. They touched down on a private landing pad in Sector 12, a district of warehouses and failing factories. The rain here fell hot and tasted of copper. They unloaded the phase anchor, a heavy coffin-sized generator, onto a repulsor sled. We need a place to hide this, Elias said, covering the device with a tarp. And we need to find this journalist, Pax Arden. Sable sent the coordinates, Lyra said, checking a data pad. He is waiting at a diplomatic mixer in the mid-level plaza. She says he is the only one who will print the story without asking the senator for permission first. Elias looked at her. You cannot go to a diplomatic mixer. You are a fugitive alien royalty. I am a mechanic named Vex, Lyra said, pulling her cap lower. And I am your bodyguard. Unless you plan to leave me here with the garbage. Elias looked at her. She was trembling slightly. The lattice was degrading, sending spikes of phantom pain through her nervous system. But her jaw was set in that familiar line of defiance. Fine, Elias said. But you do not speak. You do not make eye contact. And you definitely do not use the phrase burn worlds in casual conversation. The mid-level plaza was a sensory assault. It was a public space, which meant it was owned by 3 corporations and patrolled by private security contractors in polished white armor. The mixer was taking place in the lobby of the Gilded Tower, a structure of glass and gold that housed the offices of the Planetary Senate. Elias and Lyra moved through the crowd. Elias had cleaned up as best he could, wearing a jacket that didn't smell like engine grease, while Lyra walked a step behind him, carrying a heavy equipment case that ostensibly held camera gear but actually contained their weapons. The room was filled with the sharks of the galaxy, corporate lobbyists, military contractors, and junior senators. They held flutes of sparkling blue wine and laughed with their mouths wide open. Elias scanned the room for Pax Arden. According to the file, Pax was young, messy-haired, and usually looked like he had slept in his clothes. While Elias looked, a man in a velvet suit bumped into Lyra. He held a drink in one hand and a data pad in the other. He looked at Lyra's grease-stained disguise and sneered. "Watch it, laborer," the man said. "This suit costs more than your entire education." Lyra looked up. She forgot the rule about not speaking. She forgot the rule about eye contact. She saw a man who valued fabric over a human being. "If your education taught you that value is determined by currency," Lyra said, her voice flat and terrifyingly calm, "then you are not educated. You are merely expensive livestock waiting for a butcher." The man blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Excuse me?" Elias grabbed Lyra's arm, steering her away before the man could process the insult. "I said do not speak," Elias hissed in her ear. "He insulted my intelligence," Lyra said, sounding genuinely confused. "I was correcting his worldview. You terrified him," Elias said. "Good," Lyra replied. They found Pax Arden near the buffet table, shoving synthetic shrimp into his pockets. He looked exactly like his file, disheveled, anxious, and scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. "Pax?" Elias asked, stepping up behind him. Pax jumped, dropping a shrimp. He spun around, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You must be the delivery. Dr. Yoon said you were coming. You look intense." "We are in a hurry," Elias said. "We have the proof. We need a platform." Pax nodded, his demeanor shifting from nervous eater to sharp professional. "I know. The rumors are already flying. Senator Halden is announcing a new initiative today, the Secure Borders Act. He is claiming that alien insurgents are infiltrating the outer colonies. He is going to use it to nationalize the shipping lanes." "It is a lie," Lyra said, stepping forward. Pax looked at her. his eyes widening as he registered the unnatural stillness of her posture and the faint glow beneath the grime on her neck. You are her. The asset. I am Lyra, she said. Pax swallowed hard. Okay. Lyra, look, I can't publish this on the net. Halden has scrubbers that delete keywords before they even upload. We need to do it live. Live? Elias asked. There is a public hearing in 2 hours, Pax said. The Senate Oversight Committee. Halden is testifying. If we can get you into the gallery, and if we can jack into the main feed, we can broadcast the vault contents directly to the planetary grid. They can't scrub a live signal fast enough. That is a trap, Elias said immediately. Walking into the Senate with a wanted fugitive? It is the only way, Pax insisted. Secrecy is the oxygen these people breathe. You have to drag them into the light. Elias looked at Lyra. Her face was pale, beads of sweat forming on her brow as the implant spiked again. She nodded. We do it, she said. They had 2 hours. Pax led them to a safe house in the lower maintenance levels of the tower, a small, windowless room filled with server racks and humming cooling fans. It was noisy, but it was off the grid. Pax left to secure the credentials, leaving Elias and Lyra alone. Lyra sat on a crate, her breathing shallow. The suppressants were wearing off. The phase anchor was back at the ship, and without it, the compliance lattice was beginning to bleed static into her mind. Elias knelt in front of her. Lyra, look at me. She opened her eyes. They were unfocused, the pupils dilating rhythmically. It hurts, she whispered. It feels like I am disappearing. Elias took her hands. His own hands were shaking, just a little. He was terrified. Not of the senator, not of the guards, but of losing her. You are not disappearing, Elias said firmly. You are right here. You are real. Lyra gripped his hands, her nails digging into his palms. She pulled him closer, desperate for an anchor that wasn't made of metal or code. Make me feel it, she breathed. What? Elias asked. Make me feel real, she said. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't a tentative kiss this time. It was fierce, hungry, and edged with the panic of a dying star. She needed to know that she owned her own sensations, that the pain wasn't the only thing her body could feel. Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second, the fear of hurting her, the fear of taking advantage, but she made a sound of frustration and pulled him down. I am choosing this, she said against his mouth. Elias, I choose you. The hesitation broke. Elias wrapped his arms around her, pulling her off the crate and onto the floor, where a pile of drop cloths made a makeshift bed. The room was cold, filled with the drone of servers, but between them, the heat was immediate and overwhelming. It was a frantic, necessary collision. Hands fumbling with zippers and buckles, skin meeting skin. Elias was careful, his touch reverent even in the urgency, checking her eyes, her breath, making sure every movement was met with a yes. For Lyra, it was an act of rebellion. Every touch she initiated, every sound she made, was a reclamation of the territory of her own self. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a slave. She was a woman who wanted a man, and for the first time in her life, she was allowed to have him. They moved together in the shadows of the server room, the act becoming a conversation of survival. I am here. You are here. We are alive. When it was over, they lay tangled together under Elias's jacket. Lyra rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. The pain from the lattice was still there, a dull roar in the background, but it was distant now. Elias stroked her hair, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. I am scared, he admitted softly. Good, Lyra murmured, tracing the line of his collarbone. Fear means you are paying attention. The Senate Oversight Committee chamber was a vast amphitheater of polished marble and floating holographic displays. It was packed with press, dignitaries, and the heavy presence of the Capitol Guard. Elias and Lyra stood in the upper press gallery, wearing credentials Pax had forged. Pax stood beside them, sweating through his shirt, a data pad wired into the railing, down on the floor. Senator Corin Halden stood at a podium. He looked like the grandfather of the nation, silver hair, compassionate eyes, a voice that sounded like expensive whiskey. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Halden was saying. We have seen the reports, lawless fringes, alien cartels preying on our vulnerable colonies. That is why I established the Anti-Trafficking Task Force, to bring order, to bring safety. Elias gripped the railing. It is a lie, he muttered. He uses the task force to raid rival slavers. He eliminates the competition and seizes their stock. He is not stopping the trade, he is monopolizing it. Pax tapped his screen. I am almost in. I just need to bypass the audio buffer. When I give the signal, Lyra needs to authorize the vault dump. Lyra reached into her jacket, her hand hovering over the interface node she carried. She was sweating, the room spinning slightly. And that is why, Halden continued, his voice rising, we must pass the Secure Borders Act. We must treat these alien incursions as acts of war. Pax's screen turned green. Now, he whispered. Lyra triggered the node, but nothing happened. The holographic screens above the Senate floor did not flicker. The vault did not open. Instead, a red laser dot appeared on Lyra's chest. Elias saw it a split second before the brain registered what it was. Down! Elias screamed. He threw himself in front of Lyra just as the sniper drone, hovering silent and invisible near the dome ceiling, fired. The impact sounded like a hammer hitting wet clay. Elias was thrown back, slamming into Lyra. They both hit the floor of the gallery. Chaos erupted. Screams. The rush of security boots. Elias groaned, rolling over. His chest was smoking. The emergency gel plate he wore under his shirt, a piece of salvage tech he never flew without, had hardened instantly on impact, absorbing the kinetic round. It had saved his life, but it felt like he had been kicked by a mule. Elias, Lyra cried, scrambling over him. I am fine. Elias wheezed. Move! But they were trapped. Security guards in black armor were pouring into the gallery, blocking the exits. They weren't trying to arrest them, they were raising their rifles to kill. Lyra looked at the guards. Then she looked at Elias, gasping on the floor. Something inside her snapped. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage. She stood up. She ripped off the cap, letting her hair fall, revealing the pointed ears and the glowing patterns on her skin. She didn't run. She attacked. The first guard lunged for her. Lyra sidestepped, moving with a speed that human eyes struggled to track. She grabbed the barrel of his rifle, twisted it, and used the leverage to flip him over the railing. He fell 30 feet onto the Senate floor, crashing through a holographic display. The cameras turned. Every lens in the room focused on the upper gallery. The second guard fired. Lyra dodged, the plasma bolt singing past her ear. She closed the distance, striking him in the throat with the edge of her hand, then spinning to kick the third guard in the helmet. The impact cracked the visor. She was a whirlwind of violet light and lethal precision. She fought not like a brawler, but like a dancer trained in the art of dismantling bodies. On the floor below, Halden pointed up at the gallery, his face twisted in mock horror. There, he shouted into the microphone. An alien infiltrator, an assassin. They are attacking the Senate. The crowd panicked. The narrative was set in real time. The world wasn't seeing a desperate woman defending her partner. They were seeing a monster tearing through human security. Pax grabbed Elias, hauling him up. "We have to go. Now! Lyra!" Elias shouted. Lyra threw the last guard into a wall and turned. She grabbed Elias's hand. Her eyes were wild, glowing bright with adrenaline. "Run!" she said. They burst through the emergency exit, Pax leading them into the service corridors. Behind them, the sounds of sirens and screaming mobs began to rise. They didn't stop running until they reached the sub-basement of a derelict textile factory in the industrial zone, miles from the Senate Tower. The room was damp and smelled of mold. Elias collapsed against a pillar, clutching his bruised chest. Pax paced the floor, checking his data pad. "It is everywhere," Pax said, his voice shaking. "The footage is looping on every channel. Alien assassin targets senator. They are calling for blood. There are riots starting in the alien quarter. They are burning shops." Lyra sat in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest. She was shaking violently now. The combat adrenaline had burned through the last of her reserves. The lattice was failing. "I made it worse," she whispered. "I proved them right. I am a weapon." "You saved my life," Elias said, crawling over to her. "Do not apologize for surviving." Pax looked up. "I managed to leak a packet, just a fragment of the vault data. It shows a money transfer from Halden's office to a known slaver account. It is not enough to topple him, but it is enough to make some people ask questions. It does not matter." Lyra gasped, clutching her neck. "The lattice? It is locking down. It thinks I am being compromised. It is initiating the wipe protocol." "Wipe protocol?" Elias asked, panic rising in his voice. "It burns the brain," Lyra said, "to protect the data." The service door slammed open. Elias raised his gun but lowered it instantly. Dr. Sable Yoon stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 heavy loader droids carrying the phase anchor. She looked furious and exhausted. "You people are very loud," Sable said, marching into the room. "Get her on the anchor. Now." They lifted Lyra onto the dais of the machine. She was convulsing now, her eyes rolling back in her head. Sable connected a series of cables to the phase anchor and to a neuro headset she placed on Lyra. "This is going to be violent," Sable warned, her hands flying over the controls. "The lattice fights back. It uses trauma as a defense mechanism. It will force her to relive her worst memories to break her will. If she pulls away, the neural load will lobotomize her." "What do I do?" Elias asked. "Anchor her," Sable said. "Keep her here. She needs a constant biofeedback loop from someone she trusts. Hold her hand. Talk to her. Do not let her get lost in the dark." Sable activated the machine. A hum filled the room, rising in pitch until it was a scream. Lyra arched her back, a cry of pure agony tearing from her throat. Elias grabbed her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Lyra, listen to me!" Lyra wasn't in the room. She was back in the dark. She was in a cold cell. She was hearing the voice of her handler. "You are nothing. You are a thing to be used." She felt the pain of the branding iron. She felt the loneliness of space. "No!" she screamed. "Let me go!" Elias leaned in, his forehead against hers. "You are not there," he said, his voice steady and low. "You are with me. We are in a basement in Solara Prime. You are safe. You are loved." The word hung in the air. Loved. Lyra's convulsions slowed. She focused on the sensation of his hand, the warmth, the callus on his thumb. Sable gritted her teeth. "I am bypassing the firewall. Almost there. Elias, keep her with us." Elias kept talking. He told her about the way the light hit the rings of Saturn. He told her about the taste of real coffee. He told her about the first time he saw her and forgot how to breathe. Lyra, stay with me. Choose this. Choose us. Lyra gasped, her eyes snapping open. She looked at Elias. I choose, she whispered. A final deafening crack echoed through the room. The compliance lattice at the base of her neck flared white-hot, then turned gray and crumbled into dust. Lyra collapsed back onto the dais, unconscious but breathing. Sable slumped against the console. It is done. The vault is open. The holographic projector on the phase anchor flickered to life. Data began to scroll, thousands of files, video logs, bank transfers. It was the anatomy of a conspiracy that spanned a decade. Pax stepped forward, his eyes wide. Look at the names. Generals, CEOs. This brings down half the government. Elias looked at the stream of data. At the very end, a final file opened. It was labeled Security Clearance, Omega, Asset Handler, V, Vance. Elias froze. He tapped the file. A video window opened. A woman sat at a desk, wearing the uniform of the Terran Intelligence Directorate. She was older than the photo Elias kept, her face harder, lines of cruelty etched around her mouth. But it was her. It was his mother. Report, the woman said to the camera. The supply chain is secure. Senator Halden has agreed to the terms. We will use the alien unrest to consolidate power. My son, he is still a variable. If he interferes, standard protocols apply. He is not to be spared. The mission comes first. The recording ended. Elias stood there, the silence of the room ringing in his ears louder than any explosion. She didn't vanish, Elias whispered, his voice shattering. She is not a victim. Pax looked at him with pity. Elias? She is one of them, Elias said, the realization turning his blood to ice. She built this. She is not dead. She is the architect. The video file froze on the final frame, a woman with cold eyes and a crisp uniform, signing a death warrant for thousands of innocents with the stroke of a stylus. The silence in the damp basement was absolute, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans and the ragged breathing of the man who had just watched his entire history unravel. Elias stared at the screen. He felt a sensation akin to rapid decompression, a physical hollowing out of his chest. For 20 years, he had run. He had lived in the margins, taken scraps for pay, and refused to let anyone get close. All because he believed he was protecting the memory of a victim. He had built his entire moral architecture around the idea that his mother was a casualty of a cruel universe, a woman crushed by powers she could not fight. But she was not the victim. She was the power. She was not crushed. She was the one doing the crushing. Elias stood up, his chair scraping violently against the concrete floor. He walked to the wall and punched it, the impact vibrating up his arm. But the pain felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. Everything was a lie, Elias said, his voice raw. Every lesson she taught me. Keep your head down. Do not trust the law. Survive at all costs. She was not teaching me to be safe. She was training me to stay out of her way. He turned to the room, his eyes wild. She knew I was a salvage pilot. She probably monitored my flight paths. She let me live like a rat in the walls while she built an empire on skin and bone. Pax Arden sat in the corner, looking down at his datapad, unsure how to navigate the collapse of a man's world. But Lyra did not look away. She stood up, the fatigue of the lattice removal still clinging to her. But her eyes were clear. She walked to Elias, ignoring the rage radiating off him like heat from a dying engine. She stopped inches from him, forcing him to look at her. My father is the king of the high reach, Lyra said, her voice steady. He sold the outer colonies to your senator to pay for a shield generator that protects only the palace. He signed the contracts that put the restraint collar on my neck. Elias looked at her, blinking through the red haze in his vision. We are both children of monsters, Lyra continued. That is the truth. It is ugly, and it is heavy, but it does not define us. It defined my whole life, Elias shouted, gesturing at the screen. I ran because of her. And now you stop running, Lyra said. She reached out, taking his bruised hand in hers. Listen to me. Elias, people can be both victims and perpetrators. Your mother made her choice. My father made his. They chose power because they were afraid to be weak. You are not them. Elias looked at their joined hands, his scarred human fingers interlaced with her violet, alien ones. You have to choose what kind of man you will be now, Lyra said softly. Are you the son of Valerie Vance, the architect of slavery? Or are you Elias, the man who flew into a gravity storm to save someone who could give him nothing in return? Elias closed his eyes. He breathed in the stale air of the safe house. He thought of the photo in the lockbox, the one he had cherished like a holy relic. He let the image burn in his mind, turning to ash. When he opened his eyes, the frantic desperation was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I am the man who is going to burn her empire to the ground, Elias said. They did not have much time. The planetary net was buzzing with the news of the alien assassin and the riots burning in the lower districts. Senator Halden had declared a state of emergency, locking down the transit lanes. Pax looked up from his console. If we want to hurt them, we have to hit them where the money is. The data in the vault shows a massive transfer of assets happening tonight. Halden is liquidating the evidence before the scrutiny gets too high. Where? Elias asked, leaning over the journalist's shoulder. The charity fleet, Pax said, bringing up a schematic, the Hand of Mercy. It is a humanitarian convoy sanctioned by the government to transport war refugees from the border sectors to designated safe zones. Elias studied the ship manifest. It is a cover, he realized. They are not moving refugees to safety. They are moving stock to the buyers. It is a mobile slave market hidden behind a banner of hope. That is political hypocrisy made literal, Lyra noted with disgust. The fleet is holding orbit at the Lagrange point, Pax said. They are preparing to jump in 3 hours. If they leave the system, those people vanish forever. We take the ship, Elias said. Elias. We board the flagship, lock down the bridge, and broadcast the vault data from their own internal transmitter. They cannot jam a signal coming from inside their own fleet. It is suicide, Pax said, shaking his head. That ship will be crawling with private military contractors. Then we need a distraction, Elias said, and we need a pilot who knows how to look like he belongs in the garbage. The Hand of Mercy was a bloated, pristine white cruiser painted with the blue laurels of the Terran Coalition. It looked like a savior. To Elias, watching it from the cockpit of the Iron Moth, it looked like a coffin. They approached the fleet under the guise of a sanitation tender. Kite had spoofed their transponder to identify them as Waste Hauler 404. We are being hailed, Kite announced. The audio channel is open. Try not to sound like a fugitive. Elias opened the channel. This is Hauler 404 requesting permission to dock for emergency waste extraction. Your septic systems are flagging a code red on the municipal grid. A bored voice crackled back. Hauler 404, we have no record of a request. Clear the lane or we will fire. Kite, you are up, Elias said. Kite took over the comms, modulating its voice to sound like a harried, bureaucratic AI. This is Automated Dispatch Unit 77 Beta. I am detecting a 40% increase in biological effluent in your cargo sectors. Unless you want raw sewage backing up into the officer's mess hall during the senator's inspection. I suggest you open the damn dock. I do not have time for biological ego tripping. I have 3 other toilets to unclog in this sector. There was a long pause. The threat of sewage was apparently more terrifying than pirates. Docking Bay 4, the voice came back, sounding irritated. You have 20 minutes. The Iron Moth latched onto the massive cruiser with a metallic thud. Elias and Lyra stood by the airlock. They were dressed in stolen security uniforms Pax had sourced, black armor with full-face helmets. Remember, Elias said, checking the charge on his rifle. We get to the bridge, we upload the data, we get out, and we free them. Lyra added, we free them. Elias agreed. They moved through the corridors of the Hand of Mercy. The upper decks were polished and sterile, smelling of lemon cleanser. But as they descended into the cargo sections, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thick and hot. The smell of cleanser was replaced by the scent of sweat and fear. They found the holding pens on Deck 9. It was a cavernous bay lined with hundreds of transparent containment cells. Inside were people, human colonists, alien workers, families huddled together. They looked terrified, starved, and broken. Elias felt a surge of nausea. This was what his mother protected. This was the order she maintained. Guards patrolled the catwalks above. Elias signaled to Lyra. She moved to the left, melting into the shadows. Elias took the right. He waited until a guard passed under a steam vent, then fired a stun bolt. The guard dropped. At the same moment, Lyra dropped from the ceiling on the other side of the room, taking out 2 guards with a fluid, spinning kick that sent them crashing into the railing. The alarm klaxons blared. "Cover me!" Elias shouted, sprinting for the central control console. The remaining guards opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the metal floor. Elias slid behind a crate, returning fire. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a survivor. He shot to suppress, keeping their heads down. Lyra did not shoot. She moved. She was a blur of motion, leaping over cover, using the 0G of the upper catwalks to launch herself at the attackers. She disarmed a heavy trooper, dismantling his rifle with her bare hands before knocking him unconscious with the stock. Elias reached the console. He smashed the lock and hot-wired the door controls. "All cells, unlock!" he yelled, slamming his hand onto the release pad. The containment fields flickered and died. For a moment, there was silence. The prisoners stared at the open doors, too afraid to move. They had been conditioned to believe that hope was a trap. Lyra jumped down from the catwalk, landing in the center of the bay. She pulled off her helmet, letting her hair fall, revealing her alien features. She looked at the faces, human and alien alike, staring back at her. "Get up!" she shouted, her voice ringing off the bulkheads. A human woman near the front shrank back. "They will kill us," she whimpered. "They will try," Lyra said, walking toward her. "But they can only kill you if you stay here. Freedom is not a gift they give you because you asked nicely. Freedom is something you take back with your own hands." She offered her hand to the woman. "And it is something we protect together," Lyra said. The woman hesitated, then took Lyra's hand. She stood up. Others began to stand. Anger replaced the fear in their eyes. They picked up pipes, wrenches, fallen weapons. "Go to the shuttle bays," Elias yelled. "We will hold the corridor." The prisoners surged forward, a tidal wave of desperate humanity. Elias and Lyra covered the rear, firing into the reinforcements pouring through the blast doors. It was a chaotic, violent retreat, but they were moving. They reached the intersection leading to the bridge. A figure stepped out to block them. It was Maro Sen. The fixer looked less charming than usual. He was sweating, his velvet suit torn, holding a heavy blaster that looked too big for his hands. He was flanked by 2 combat droids. "Elias," Maro said, his voice trembling. "Please, stop. Get out of the way." "Maro," Elias warned, raising his rifle. "I cannot," Maro pleaded. "Halden owns my debt. If I let you pass, he will liquefy my assets. He will kill me." "He is going to kill everyone," Elias said. "Look around you, Maro. This ship is a tomb. Help us. Testify. If you help us expose him, the debt dies with him. You can be free." Maro hesitated. He looked at the datapad in Elias's hand, the vault data. He looked at the chaos behind them. For a second, Elias thought he saw a spark of decency. "Okay," Maro said, lowering the gun. "Okay, I will help." He stepped aside. Elias lowered his rifle, moving past him. "Thank you." As Lyra passed, Maro lunged. It was a desperate, cowardly move. He didn't fire. He tried to grab her, to use her as a shield, to have a bargaining chip for when the inevitable hammer fell. He jammed the barrel of his gun against her temple. "Nobody move," Maro screamed, his eyes wide with panic. "I have the asset." Elias froze, his heart stopping. "Maro, do not do this. I have to look out for number 1. "Elias," Maro yelled, "that is the rule." Lyra didn't panic. She didn't scream. She simply exhaled. She remembered the lesson Elias had taught her. Saving you doesn't make you mine. She remembered the lesson her father had failed to learn. Power is not possession. She moved with a speed that Maro could not comprehend. She dropped her weight, twisting her body away from the barrel. As the shot went wide, scorching the ceiling, she grabbed Maro's wrist. She didn't break it. She could have. She could have crushed his windpipe. Instead, she twisted the gun from his hand and swept his legs, slamming him onto the deck. She stood over him, the blaster pointed at his chest. Maro squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the death he deserved. "Go," Lyra said. Maro opened his eyes. "What?" "Get to a shuttle," she said, tossing the blaster down the corridor. "Run away. Maro, live with your shame. That is your punishment." Maro scrambled backward, looking at her with a mix of terror and confusion. He didn't understand mercy. He scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the smoke. "Why?" Elias asked, coming to her side. "Because," Lyra said, watching the empty corridor. "If I let what they did to me make me cruel, then they have won. I am not them." Elias looked at her, breathless. He had never loved her more than he did in that moment. "We have to get to the bridge," he said. They breached the bridge with explosives. The crew surrendered immediately. They were pilots, not soldiers. And the sight of a furious alien woman and a heavy-worlder salvage pilot was enough to break their resolve. Elias jumped onto the comms console. "Kite. Interface." "I am in," Kite said, uploading the vault to the planetary grid, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. "This is going to be loud." The upload bar on the screen began to fill. 10%, 20. Suddenly, the ship shuddered. The lights on the bridge turned a deep, blood red. "Upload failed," Kite said. "Connection terminated." "What?" Elias tapped the screen. "Why? It is a blackout protocol," Kite said. A jamming signal of massive magnitude just originated from the Senate orbital platform. "They have killed the entire planetary comms net. Nothing goes in or out of the atmosphere." "Halden," Elias cursed. He knew we were coming. A new signal broke through the static on the main view screen. It wasn't human. It was a high-frequency transmission using royal encryption keys. The face of a high general of Lyra's people appeared. He looked stern, his gold mask reflecting the bridge lights. "Princess Lyra." The general boomed, "We know you are alive. We know you are with the humans. Return to the fleet immediately. If you do not surrender within 1 hour, we will consider your abduction an act of war. We will cleanse the scandal with fire. We will burn the sector to ensure silence." The screen went black. Lyra stood frozen. They weren't coming to save her. They were coming to kill the witnesses. Her own family was threatening to glass a planet to hide their crimes. She slumped against the console, her legs giving out. "It never ends," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "I am just a symbol. I am a bargaining chip, an asset, a reason for war. I am so tired, Elias. I am so tired of being something for everyone else." Elias walked to her. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He knelt down, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Then stop," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes broken. "Stop what?" "Stop being a symbol," Elias said. "I do not care about your crown. I do not care about the war or the politics or the royal blood. I do not love the princess." He reached up, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I love the woman who taught me how to listen to the stars," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love the woman who spared the man who betrayed her. I love the mechanic named Vex who terrified a diplomat. I love you, Lyra. Just you." Lyra stared at him. The words hit her harder than any blow. He saw her, beneath the lattice, beneath the title, beneath the trauma. She leaned into him, burying her face in his neck. She cried, a release of tension that had been building for years. Elias held her, solid and unmoving, while the universe fell apart around them. When she pulled back, her eyes were red, but the despair was gone. It was replaced by a fierce, quiet resolve. "I love you," she said. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket, pulling him close. "And if we die today," she whispered, fierce and low, "we die as us, not as their pawns. We belong to no one but each other." It was a vow, a promise made in the center of a war zone. Elias kissed her hard. "Then we make it count." Pax ran onto the bridge, waving a data pad. "Elias, I found something in the ship's nav computer. This fleet, it is not jumping to the border." "Where is it going?" Elias asked. "It is rigged to descend," Pax said, his face pale. "The autopilot is set for a collision course with the capital city. The fusion drives have been overridden to overload on impact." "It is a bomb," Lyra realized, horror dawning. "A dirty bomb the size of a city. Halden's endgame," Elias said. "He crashes the fleet into the capital. He blames it on the aliens, claims it was a terrorist strike to rescue the princess. He uses the panic to seize emergency powers, suspend the Senate, and legalize indenture as a wartime necessity. He kills millions to enslave billions," Lyra said. "We have to stop it," Elias said. "Can we override the autopilot?" "Negative," Kite said. "The lockout is hardware-based. It is controlled from an external source. The Senate orbital platform," Elias said, looking up at the ceiling. "That is where the jamming signal is coming from. That is where the kill switch is. Halden is up there, preparing his speech," Pax said. Elias turned to the helm. "Kite, detach the Iron Moth. We are going to the orbital platform, the Pax. Stay here," Elias ordered. "Rally the prisoners. Get them to the escape pods. If we fail, you have to get these people off the ship before it falls." "What about you?" Pax asked. "We are going to crash a party," Elias said. The flight up to the orbital platform was a vertical sprint. The Iron Moth screamed through the upper atmosphere, shaking violently as it fought the gravity well. Above them, the Senate orbital platform hung like a halo over the world. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a gleaming ring of white metal where the elite looked down on the dirt they ruled. Kite. Weapon status? Elias asked. We have 1 mining laser and 3 flare decoys, Kite said. Against the station defenses, our life expectancy is approximately 4 seconds. Fly erratic, Elias said. Lyra, talk to me. Lyra was in the co-pilot seat, her eyes closed, listening to the hum of the station's gravity stabilizers. The rhythm is arrogant, she said. It is too perfect. There is a harmonic flaw in the docking ring. If we hit it with a kinetic pulse, we can force the bay doors open. Do it, Elias said. They dove toward the station. Defense turrets tracked them, spitting lines of green fire. Elias rolled the ship, spinning through the barrage. Hold on, Lyra yelled. She timed the pulse perfectly. The mining laser hit the harmonic stress point. The massive blast doors of the VIP hangar shuddered and groaned open, their magnetic seals failing. Elias slammed the thrusters into reverse, drifting the ship sideways into the hangar. They crashed onto the deck, skidding sparks for 100 meters before slamming into a parked diplomatic shuttle. Elias and Lyra were out of their seats before the smoke cleared. They ran across the hangar deck. Guards were scrambling, but the sheer audacity of the crash had bought them seconds of confusion. They burst into the main corridor leading to the broadcast center, and then they stopped. Standing in the middle of the hallway, flanked by 4 elite commandos in matte black armor, was a woman. She wore a gray suit, tailored and sharp. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a mother waiting for a wayward child. Valerie Vance? Elias halted, his breath catching in his throat. Hello. Elias, she said. Her voice was calm, conversational. You have caused quite a mess. Elias raised his rifle, aiming it at her chest. Step aside, he said. Valerie didn't flinch. She looked at the gun, then up at his eyes. She looked disappointed. Put it down, she said. You are not a killer. Elias, I raised you better than that. You raised me to be a ghost. Elias spat. You raised me to hide while you sold people like cattle. I did what was necessary, she said, taking a step forward. Order requires sacrifice. Civilization is not built on kindness. It is built on control. Someone has to make the hard choices. Elias laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Is that what you call it? Hard choices? You are a slaver, mother, just like the rest of them. Valerie sighed. I am offering you a deal, Elias. 1 time only. Stand down. Give me the drive. We will scrub your record. You can have a new ship, a new life, anywhere in the galaxy. And Lyra? Elias asked. Valerie looked at Lyra. She didn't see a person, or she saw a variable. The asset stays, Valerie said. She is too valuable to lose. She will be treated well. She will be comfortable. Lyra stepped forward, her head high. I am not an asset. Valerie ignored her, keeping her eyes on Elias. Choose, son. You can walk away free, or you can die here for an alien girl who will eventually be returned to her cage anyway. Elias looked at his mother. He looked at the woman who had birthed him, who had held him when he was sick, who had lied to him every single day of his life. Then he looked at Lyra. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the equal he had chosen. He lowered the rifle slowly. Valerie smiled, a small, triumphant quirk of her lips. Good boy. Elias looked up, his face hardening into stone. I am not your boy, he said. He raised the rifle again, not at her, but at the ceiling, at the exposed coolant pipe running directly above the commandos. And I am not walking away. Elias fired. The shot did not hit the commandos. It hit the junction of the liquid nitrogen coolant line running across the ceiling. The pipe ruptured with a sound like a cracking glacier. A dense white fog of supercooled gas exploded downward, instantly engulfing the corridor. The commandos shouted, their thermal optics blinding white-hot from the sudden temperature variance, their armor joints locking up as the freezing mist crystallized on contact. "Run!" Elias roared, grabbing Lyra's hand. They sprinted through the artificial blizzard. The cold was biting, stinging exposed skin, but it provided the cover they needed. They brushed past the frozen shapes of the guards, who were struggling to move their seized limbs. As they passed Valerie Vance, Elias slowed for a fraction of a second. She had not moved. She stood in the swirling mist, her gray suit untouched, her face unreadable. She could have drawn a weapon. She could have tripped the alarm. She did neither. She simply watched him go, a ghost watching the living choose a different path. "Don't look back," Lyra shouted, pulling him forward. They burst out of the freezing fog and into the main atrium of the Senate orbital platform. The station was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance. It was a halo of glass and polished marble, suspended in the void above the planet. Sunlight streamed in through the panoramic viewports, illuminating the statues of past leaders, men and women who had built a civilization on the backs of those they erased from history. Every hallway was polished to a mirror shine, and every decision made here stained worlds that these senators would never visit. "We need to get to the broadcast spire," Elias said, checking his rifle. "Kite, are you in the system? I am currently fighting a very aggressive firewall that seems to think I am a toaster oven," Kite replied in his ear. "However, I have successfully hijacked the internal signage." Elias glanced at a holographic display that was supposed to be showing the senators' approval ratings. Instead, it flashed in bright red block letters. "The senator is lying to you. Also, his tie is ugly. Focus, Kite," Elias muttered. "Pax is in position," Lyra said, checking her wrist comp. "The independent satellites are aligned. Sable says the phase anchor is rigged to the quantum relay. We just need to trigger it from the central node, which is behind the Senate chamber," Elias said. They ran toward the massive double doors of the chamber. The station was in lockdown, but the chaos Elias had caused in the hangar and the freezing of the elite guard had bought them a window. Senators and aides were scrambling in the corridors, clutching data pads and looking for escape pods. They reached the heavy durasteel doors of the Senate chamber. Elias placed a breaching charge on the lock mechanism. "Ready?" he asked Lyra. She took a breath, centering herself. The lattice in her neck was throbbing, a dull ache that warned of the collapse to come, but she pushed it down. "Ready," she said. The charge detonated. The doors blew inward. The Senate chamber was a vast amphitheater, rows of floating pods arranged around a central podium. Senator Corin Halden stood there, bathed in the spotlight, his image projected onto screens 100 feet tall. He had not stopped his speech. If anything, the chaos outside had given him more ammunition. "Terrorists!" Halden bellowed, his voice amplified to shake the walls. "They attack our station. They attack our way of life. This is why we need the Secure Borders Act. This is why we must militarize the transit lanes." Elias and Lyra stepped through the smoke of the breached doors. The room went silent. Thousands of eyes turned to them. The cameras, which Halden had been using to broadcast his propaganda, swiveled to capture the intruders. "There she is!" Halden shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Lyra. "The royal saboteur, the alien spy sent to destroy us." Guards rushed onto the floor, weapons raised, surrounding Elias and Lyra. There were too many to fight. Dozens of laser sights painted red dots on their chests. "Hold fire," Halden commanded. The guards froze. Halden smiled, the expression of a predator who has cornered its prey. He adjusted his suit and walked to the edge of the podium, looking down at them. He wanted a show. He wanted a confession. "Princess Lyra," Halden said, his voice dripping with faux compassion. "You have been used by your military. We know this. You were sent here to destabilize our government. But we are a merciful people." He gestured to a drone hovering nearby, recording every second. "Renounce your mission," Halden said. "Admit that your family sent you to attack us. Confirm that the riots below are orchestrated by your people. If you do this, I will grant you clemency. I will sign a pardon. You will live out your days in safety here on the station, as a guest of the state." Elias gripped his rifle, his knuckles white. It was the trap. If she agreed, she validated his war. If she refused, she died a terrorist. Lyra stepped forward. She did not look at the guards. She did not look at the cameras. She looked directly at Halden. "A guest?" Lyra asked, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the silent room. "You mean a prisoner. You mean a trophy." "I mean alive," Halden said coldly. "Sign the confession, and you live. Refuse, and you are an enemy combatant." Lyra looked at the datapad, a hovering aid extended toward her. It was a contract, just like the one in the lounge, just like the one her father had signed. "It is always paper with you," Lyra said. "You think if you write it down, it becomes moral. You think if you call it a contract, it is not slavery." She knocked the datapad from the ade's hand. It clattered loudly on the floor. "A contract signed under violence is not consent," Lyra shouted. She turned to the cameras, addressing the galaxy. "I am not a spy. I am a witness, and I will not buy my life with a lie." "Kill them," Halden screamed, his composure shattering. Elias moved. He didn't fire at the guards. He threw a flashbang grenade at his own feet. The blinding white light erupted, stunning the guards and the cameras. In the confusion, Elias tackled Lyra, rolling them behind the cover of a floating senator's pod. "Kite, now!" Elias yelled. "I am routing the feed!" Kite shouted, on the massive screens above the podium. Halden's face flickered and vanished. Static replaced it. Then, a stream of data. The vault opened. It started with bank transfers. Billions of credits moving from the Terran treasury to private accounts owned by Halden. Then came the video logs, Halden shaking hands with the alien High General, the blueprints for the refugee ships that were designed as cages, the kill orders for journalists. The Senate chamber erupted in chaos. Senators were shouting, pointing at the screens. The guards looked around, unsure of their orders. The truth was pouring out like water from a broken dam, drowning the lie in real time. Halden watched the screens, his face draining of color. He saw his empire dissolving in pixels and code. He turned to his personal console. He punched in a code. "He is triggering the detonator." Pax's voice screamed over the comms. "The fleet! He is going to crash the fleet!" Elias broke cover. He vaulted over the pod, sprinting toward the podium. A guard raised a rifle, but Elias didn't stop. He fired a suppression shot, forcing the guard down, and kept running. Halden looked up, his eyes manic. He held a physical key, inserted into the console. "It does not matter," Halden screamed. "If I burn, the world burns with me." He reached to turn the key. A single gunshot rang out. It did not come from Elias. Halden spun around, clutching his shoulder. He fell against the podium, the key slipping from his blood-slicked fingers. Valerie Vance stood at the entrance to the podium, a smoking pistol in her hand. She walked forward, her steps measured, her face calm. She kicked the key away from Halden's hand. "You?" Halden wheezed, staring at her. "You are one of us." Valerie looked down at him. She looked at the screens showing the faces of the children she had helped enslave. She looked at her son, who was standing 10 feet away, his chest heaving, his eyes wide. "I was," Valerie said softly, "but my son is right. Survival without dignity is just a slower death." She looked at Elias. There was no warmth in her eyes, but there was respect. "Go," she said. "The lattice is destabilizing. You need to finish the procedure." "Mother," Elias said, stepping toward her, "come with us." Valerie shook her head. She typed a command into the console, locking out the detonator codes permanently. Then she triggered the station's blast shields, sealing the podium off from the rest of the room. "Someone has to stay to answer for this," she said. "Go, Elias. Be the man I could not be." Security drones swarmed the podium. Valerie dropped her gun and raised her hands. Elias hesitated. He wanted to save her. He wanted to scream. But Lyra fell to her knees behind him, a cry of agony tearing from her throat. The bioluminescence on her skin was flashing violently, turning from violet to an angry, burning red. The lattice was collapsing. Elias made the choice. He turned away from his mother and ran to Lyra. He scooped her up, carrying her through the chaos of the fleeing Senate. He kicked open the door to a maintenance antechamber and laid her on the floor. "Sable," Elias yelled into his comms. "We are clear. Do it now." "I need a stable connection," Sable shouted back. "The interference is too high. You have to bridge the signal manually." Elias ripped the comm unit from his belt and jammed it into the port on the back of Lyra's neck implant. He grabbed her hands. "Lyra, look at me." She was convulsing. Her eyes were rolled back, seeing nothing but the dark. The lattice was trying to burn her mind to protect the secrets that were already out. "Let me go," she gasped. "It hurts." "Elias, please, let me go." "No," Elias shouted. "I am not letting you go. You choose life. Lyra, you hear me? You choose life." He pressed his forehead against hers. He poured every ounce of his will into her. He thought of the quiet moments in the ruin. He thought of the way she laughed. He thought of the future they could have. "Stay with me." Lyra felt him. In the storm of pain, he was a lighthouse. She felt his hands. She heard his voice. "You are my equal. You are my choice." She grit her teeth. She grabbed the darkness inside her head and shoved it back. "I choose," she whispered. A spark of electricity arced between the comm unit and the implant. The device gave a high-pitched whine, then cracked with a sound like a breaking bone. The red light on her skin faded. The violet glow returned, soft and steady. The implant disengaged, sliding out of the port and clattering onto the floor. Lyra took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that tasted of smoke and freedom. She opened her eyes. Elias was hovering over her, tears streaming down his face. "Hey," she whispered weakly. "Hey." Elias choked out. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. They stayed there on the floor of the maintenance room while the sirens wailed outside, holding on to each other like the only solid things in a dissolving universe. The aftermath was not clean. Revolutions never are. Senator Halden was arrested by the Capitol Guard, dragged away screaming about treason. The fleet was stopped, the autopilot override canceled by Valerie's lockout. Valerie Vance surrendered. She was taken into custody, silent and upright. She would face a tribunal. She would likely spend the rest of her life in a cell. Elias knew he would visit her, but he also knew he could never fix her. That was the complicated, messy nature of forgiveness. It didn't wash away the sins, it just allowed you to stop carrying the weight of them. The riots on the surface did not stop overnight. The truth was out, but anger takes time to cool. However, the narrative had changed. The aliens were no longer invaders, they were victims. The humans were no longer the benevolent protectors, they were the exploiters. It was a painful, ugly mirror to look into. But for the first time in a generation, the eyes of the galaxy were open. 1 week later, the observation deck of the Iron Moth was quiet. The ship was docked at a neutral station on the edge of the system, undergoing repairs that were actually being paid for by a legitimate salvage contract. Elias stood by the viewport, looking out at the stars. He wore a clean shirt. He looked younger. The weight of the fugitive life lifted from his shoulders. The door hissed open. Lyra walked in. She wore civilian clothes, a simple tunic and trousers. The grease was gone. The fear was gone. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin glowed softly, a testament to her heritage, no longer hidden. She stood beside him, looking out at the drift. "Pax says the hearings start tomorrow," Lyra said. "My father has been deposed. A provisional council is taking over the High Reach." "And here?" Elias asked. "The Senate is dissolving," she said. "New elections in 3 months. It is a mess." Elias smiled, taking a sip of coffee. "A mess is better than a lie?" He turned to face her. "And what about you? The Provisional Council. They want you back. They want a symbol of the new era. Queen Lyra. It has a ring to it." Lyra looked at her reflection in the glass. She saw the royalty in her face. Yes. But she also saw the mechanic, the warrior, the survivor. "I told them no," she said. Elias raised an eyebrow. "No, I am done being a symbol," she said. "I sent them the coordinates of the survivors from the charity fleet. They are the leaders they need. They know what freedom costs." "So what are you?" Elias asked, stepping closer. Lyra reached out, taking his hand. She interlaced their fingers, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "I am a partner," she said. "To a very sarcastic ship AI and a pilot who needs someone to watch his back." "I object to the description," Kite's voice floated from the ceiling speakers. "I am not sarcastic. I am realistically pessimistic. Also, your heart rates are synchronizing again. It is disgusting. I am turning off the audio sensors in this room. You have 10 minutes before we depart." The speakers clicked off. Elias laughed, a low, genuine sound. 10 minutes, he said. Lyra stepped into his space. She wrapped her arms around his neck, looking up at him with eyes that held galaxies. "Elias," she said softly, "you bought a contract once." "I did," Elias said, his hand settling on her waist. "You voided it," she said. "You said you did not want to own me." "I meant it," Elias said. "I know," Lyra said. "That is why I am here, because you did not ask for me." She pulled him down, her lips brushing his. "I am not a gift," she whispered against his mouth. "I am not a slave, and I am not a princess." "Then what are you?" Elias asked, his voice barely a breath. She kissed him. It was a kiss of absolute, terrifying freedom. It was the taste of a future that hadn't been written yet. "I am your equal," she said, pulling back to look him in the eye. "And you are my choice." Elias smiled. He kissed her again. And this time, he didn't stop. "We have work to do," he said. "Later." Lyra said, "Outside." The stars burned cold and bright, indifferent to their small lives. But inside the ship, in the warmth of the light, they were enough.